This is Laugh or Death, hosted by keynote speaker Paul Osincup.
All right, I'm excited to have my guest today with me. And this is another one where it's like, I'm really excited to finally get to talk with this guy because it's another one of those where you, for a while, meet somebody on LinkedIn or another social media app, and we've kind of just been vibing on each other's careers and different content and been like really just cheering each other on over the last couple of years. And so it made sense that we finally get to get together and chat a little bit. So I'm really excited to have David Uribe. He's got a unique job. He's the founder of the comedy branding agency. And the mission really is to help comedians get seen, get booked, and get paid with a standout brand that cannot be ignored. David works with performers worldwide to grow their gigs and fans beyond the mic. So, David, glad to have you, man.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. If you've seen any episodes before, you know the first question we always ask is for you to share something weird about yourself, something weird that makes you happy or something weird about you that you love. So have at it, man. What's something weird about you?
Yeah, I think maybe one little factoid about me is that for a while, I was a joke writer for pastors. So
Yes, that's awesome. A joke writer for pastors. So
yes.
tell me more about that. Like, what do you remember any of your favorite pastor jokes?
No, so what I would do, so I was for a while, I was working as the arts and communications director for a multi-site church in South Florida, and I was the communications director essentially. And one of the particular like pastors, he's like, "Hey, I want, he's like, you're a funny guy. I want you to kind of help spruce up my sermons. So, here's my sermon. Here's what I'm doing. Insert jokes wherever you can. Insert like levity and and fun."
Yeah.
And so that became a little bit part of my job is like, in addition to, coordinating all kinds of communication efforts and design and creative and video and stuff, I was like, now I'm also tapping into the actual sermons themselves. So I feel like I had a little bit of credit for any levity that happens on stage in those weekends.
Yeah, no kidding. You're sitting there in the pew, and the father gets a laugh, and you're looking around like, yeah, that was my joke. Yeah,
Yeah.
Isn't that, yeah. That's awesome, man. That's cool. Did you ever get feedback like a joke doesn't land, and he talks to you after, like, hey, man, we got to punch this up a little better next time?
This particular guy, he came, he actually came from like the executive like business world, and so like being a pastor was kind of like his second, career. And so he was not shy about giving me feedback. He's like, that didn't land, or that, and usually we'd have like two services on a particular weekend. So the first service is you're like testing it. And then I would be able to kind of like, hey, man, why don't you hit it like this, hit it like maybe try a little bit more of a pause and then see how that went on the second time. So that was always fun.
That's awesome, man. Do you remember any of the bits or anything, or any of the things of like how you helped him create levity or anything?
No, not anything in particular. It always really depended on that particular sermon that he was talking about, right? If there's a particular talking point or, some kind of self-deprecating thing we could throw in there. Like people love when like leaders kind of make fun of themselves and can kind of, make themselves look like, a little bit of a dummy because we feel, we relate to that. So I try to do that wherever possible.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny, like even in my book, there's a chapter on, as a leader, how to incorporate more humor in your work. And part of that in this model I have, the part of it is ask for help and like don't feel like you have to be the funny one all the time. He did that instinctually. He was like, oh, look, man, I've got my kind of regular sermon here, but if I find a funny person and they could punch this up a little bit, then hey. So that was good instincts by him. That's awesome. So you do comedy branding. So you help comedians create the best version of themselves, their work, their websites, everything online. I know that a kid doesn't grow up going like, when I grow up, I want to do branding for comedians, right? So like, how did you get it? I think it's a very unique line of work. How did you get into it?
Yeah, I like to think that it's kind of a combination of my two passions because I've only ever worked in creative fields. I went to like a special high school for design and then for college for design. And in that time, I also was an intern at a motion graphics studio. So I've really kind of cut my teeth in all kinds of branding, marketing, animation, creative writing, the full scope of anything to do with creative visually or messaging. And also there was a season in my life where I was doing a lot of stand up. And so I knew kind of some of the pain points that comedians have from just beyond, when you're on stage, right? And so I feel like, especially now when everything is digital, like the way that you get found as a performer is online. I feel like, I can bring in both worlds together. Like my 21 plus years in different, environments as a creative, and then, seeing the opportunity that comedians have to really stand out, because, like comedy is booming right now. I mean,
Right.
like in every city, there's open mics everywhere. There's comedy clubs, the Kevin Hart's, Funny AF show on Netflix. There's like Kill Tony. So there's no shortage of comedians and opportunities for comedians, but there is definitely an opportunity to stand out, because when everybody's on stage wearing a hoodie and just cracking jokes and that's all you got, it's harder to penetrate the mass market if you just kind of look like everybody else. So that's a big piece that I'm passionate about, is just helping like really talented comedians, and especially really seasoned comedians, to stand out.
Yeah, that's great. So when you were younger then, so you got your background was in like graphic design and stuff, and so you were doing that, but you just also like were a big fan of comedy, or did you do some comedy? Did you try comedy?
Yeah, I performed comedy for a while, and I've done both stand up and improv. And then I've just done a lot of silly content online, and like I've always been comfortable making a fool of myself online or on stage, and just, doing whatever for the laugh. And so it's just like, man, I have a unique perspective that most people can't say that they have, right? A lot of people can't say that they've been on stage to, to do stand up or to try to make people laugh. And so I'm like, man, I feel like there's a calling here to combine my giftings in a way that only I can do, right?
Yeah.
So that I felt like that was a big opportunity, and I've had, the luxury to work with some really great people, and it's been fun. So, I'm only a couple of years into like focusing specifically on comedy, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, well, and plus, as a comic, it's like having at least some background, having done it yourself. Then some of what a comedian's looking for with their website or their clips or that kind of stuff. Like, hey, no, don't post that full clip; it's way too long. Let's, or like we're not even ending on the punchline here, or why do we have this content on my website that's like got all these filler words when we can get straight to a laugh quicker or whatever. Like as a comic, you would understand that and know like we can make this way punchier, way better, and something that a comedian might take issue with like just any brand or marketing team that they're working with going, oh, I know how to do this better than they do, or at least the written content part. But you've got your foot in both worlds, which is pretty cool. Plus, you've probably had the experience of bombing before, which I think is like every comic's like, just knowing the pain of that is like, hey, that is a special fraternity.
It really is. It really is. Like, I remember like the first time I seriously bombed, I didn't get back on stage for months. It was just such a wound. I'm like,
Yeah.
all right. So I definitely, I empathize with performers, and and it's funny because there's a lot of people online who offer kind of coaching on joke writing and performance, and there's a lot of that. There's very few people who are really helping comedians like stand out and market themselves better. And so I feel like, man, this feels like a big opportunity. Like there's not a lot of people doing this, and I feel like, man, I feel like I can really make a big impact. I feel like my mission in life is just to bring more laughter into the world. And if I can do that by like elevating really talented comedians, then I feel like, man, I'm accomplishing my life's mission.
That's great. Yeah. So I want to hear more about the time when you didn't get back on stage. I'm guessing you were young, because the same happened to me. I always really admire comics that start really young and they're able to stick with it, because that like at a young age, man, at least in my experience, your pride is so huge that it's like, it is hard to get past that. I have a previous episode of my podcast where I talk all about like winning this stand-up comedy contest when I was like 23. And then I was like, I got to take comedy seriously. But then I couldn't handle the bad nights. And so I just took it way too seriously, and I just quit for a long time because it was all or nothing. And I was like, man, I got to just make it nothing for a while. And now that I'm older, I'm like, it's just so much easier for me to have that perspective. But what was it like for you with that?
Yeah, it was absolutely, and it wasn't like I got anybody booed me or anything. It was just like I was used to a certain type of like laughter based off of my set. And then one time I was at a venue with a completely different type of audience, and just none of my go-tos were hitting, like none of them. And I remember, using my big joke where I was used to big laughter, and it was absolute crickets, silence, and my throat immediately dried up, and I didn't have like a cup of water or anything near me, and so I was just like, okay, you guys have been great.
Right. Oh man, like anyone who hasn't done comedy, there is no worse feeling than, it's one thing to try a joke, knowing like, oh, this is the first or second time I've ever tried this, and knowing that maybe you're gonna get a weak reaction because you're just trying it out. But when you have some jokes that kill 90% of the time, and you've got a quiet room, and you're like, okay, well now I'm gonna hit him with this, and it's still quiet. It's like, oh man, what is happening? And I remember that, especially early on, it's like you can feel physically in your body. It's like I could feel sweat on my head. Yes. And I was like, what is happening? It's so weird. And it's weird to have people just looking at you when and you try not to pause for a laugh, but you're kind of like, you say the joke and it's like, okay. Yeah. It's like, well, Rodney Dangerfield, like, he used to have, he used to always be like, oh, tough crowd. Yeah. Like, that's a good go-to little bit there. He could just, play it off or whatever. But man, and now, like having done it for a lot longer, it's like, okay, I know there's ways to change the vibe, talk about what just happened, or like start doing a little crowd work to just try to change the momentum in the room. But man, that is a freaking like heart-stopping thing to try to get over.
For sure.
As somebody, like when you were doing comedy, did you feel like, oh man, people like being at your church, if you were kind of the funny guy that's writing jokes for the pastor, that kind of stuff, like do people like always expect you to be funny and that kind of stuff when you're like constantly doing things?
Yeah, so much of my comedy started kind of in the church space. So like when I started doing it, I would actually tour with the worship band from the church, and they would do like different, they would perform at different churches. And when I started kind of really honing my skill, they were like, hey, why don't you just open for us doing stand up? And so I got a reputation, at least like in town locally, and even people at the church, that I was the funny guy. And then they asked me to speak at like a men's group or something like that. And when you're invited to speak at a men's group, like I was thinking they wanted me to talk about a really serious like spiritual subject. And so I came at it, like the mission to my mind, the assignment was like talk about this particular topic. And I brought no humor into that one.
Yeah.
And everyone was really disappointed. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I didn't, I kind of forgot that like people see me in that light. And I think that's really served me really well later on, because I'm like, I've identified like that's a superpower I have. Like humor is a superpower, and and as a father of two girls, like I help them understand like you have superpowers, and both of you have like humor is a built-in superpower you have. Maybe you don't recognize it, but you do. And so, definitely use your superpowers when you can. So, and I take that into the branding with my clients, because like some comedians have a very particular style. Some are very dry, and that's their superpower, is like a dry sensibility, a certain cadence. Other people are way more wackier and zanier. Other are angrier, or so I feel like there's always a big opportunity in being self-aware and really leaning into the thing that makes you unique.
Yeah, that's so smart. And I think anybody, whether you're in the comedy space or whatever it is you're doing for a living, it's like really enhancing and showcasing your strengths versus always trying to go like, what can I get better at? What am I weak at? It's like But also, if you double down on your superpowers, on your strengths, you may be able to do things you never even imagined. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on with that. What kind of comics then inspired you when you were young? Like what made you love comedy?
Man, it's probably every, or a big majority of comedians when they first start, you're just kind of just ripping off what you see, like what works. Like you see a Richard Pryor, you see somebody, and you're like, I'm just gonna try that whole thing and see how it works. And so I would just try just some of the stuff that other people were doing, and I would understand like, oh, okay, I noticed that when I do it, do it this way, I get a certain laugh. So like I loved Pablo Francisco. He just has a zany, wacky, using his voice and all that sort of stuff.
That like little tortilla boy, the Pablo Francisco, was like an all-time. Like that was in my head forever. It was like, only one man, can save the world. Little Tortilla Boy, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everybody get down. Yeah, so good, man. That was like, oh man, I watched that so many times. That guy is brilliant. Yeah,
he's so funny. And then like I'm from Colombian parents. I'm a Hispanic Latino guy. So I also started leaning in on some of that aspect of it. I'm like, man, this is a big part of my identity. Why wouldn't it be part of my humor? And so I would just lean into that sort of stuff. And so yeah, I've just kind of dabbled with a lot of different styles over the years. I don't perform as much now, but like again, I'm more passionate about helping other people with their just helping them stand out and what makes them unique.
Something you said there too that I think really ties in with that is like when you said like being of Latino descent and trying to lean into that for who you were as a comedian. That's something that in recent years, and as I'm writing stuff now, I've realized that like being around comedy clubs, I do improv and stand up. In my mind, I am much younger than I actually am. Okay. So I'm always thinking like I'm 25, 26 years old and I'm hanging out with all these young comics and whatever. But then I realized like, dude, you're going to be 50 next year. And so I realized that I was writing a lot of stuff that wasn't really like appropriate for my age, I guess, or just didn't feel like my real life right now. And as I've started kind of reconnecting with like writing bits about getting older and marriage and that kind of stuff, it's like so much more on brand for like who I am right now, as opposed to just trying to get a laugh with something I thought of that really isn't my voice.
Yeah, I think it's very insightful. Is like so much of what's comedy, like the best parts about comedy is what's true. It's what's the thing that everyone feels but doesn't say, and so I just love when a comedian can just immediately get up on stage and call out the thing that makes them weird, or like the thing that they recognize most people in the room are probably thinking. And so like so much of that is applicable in marketing. Like I think like the great marketers of this world and like the great brands who know how to get your attention, they're usually calling out some kind of funny truth that most people are not willing to say. And I feel like, man, there's a perfect pairing of comedy and marketing, because like the people who do it best are tapping into something that everyone feels, and when you say it, it's like it's like this perfect chemical reaction.
Yeah, it's funny. My best friend just texted me a photo. He passed by a huge billboard in Hollywood, and it's for like a women's gut health company. And the billboard and it's got a scrolling, or it's got like a ticker like of numbers. And so it's like 1,200,000,000 whatever hot chicks poop today. And he sent me that, and I'm like, what is this? I had to scroll in closer to see like what it was an ad for, But like when you talk about just naming the truth, like it's not even trying to make a joke. It's just like there's a named truth. It's very on brand for them. Like there you go. It caught my friend's attention to take a picture of it and send it to me. So there you go.
Yeah, one billboard that I've seen now in multiple cities, but I think it does the job, is the one that says your wife is hot. Get your AC repaired. And names the local AC company or something like. So it's like there's some stuff that are like proven simple formats that like so much of marketing is just interrupting, the patterns of life. And so like, if you can just say something sometimes I think almost always the simpler, the more direct you can get at it, like you're going to get attention. And that's kind of the secret sauce of comedy and marketing.
Yeah, and I mean, all the when you think about how much companies pay for Super Bowl ads, and then all the top performing ads every year are funny ones with the occasional like sappy, puppy gets lost and find its way home to a beer one or something. But like, but usually they're just goofy, funny ads, and they spend millions and millions of dollars on those things. So it obviously seems to work well. What about like in your life generally? How does humor show up in terms of like getting you through tough times? Is there a time when it surprised you where like, oh man, I was going through a hard time, but humor kind of helped me through it?
I think at this stage of life with just kids, I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter, and high emotions. Like they're clumsy, they bump into stuff, they cry, and so much of like what immediately gets things better is just being willing to laugh at the situation. So I'm like, I'm actually facing something that's coming up soon that I'm kind of dreading. I have a sick dog, and I'm like, oh man, I know I'm gonna need a good dose of humor when this is all over, because it's just kind of heartbreaking, to see like anybody suffering or anything like that, or especially a dog that you love and stuff. So it's just like I just recognize that. Actually, okay, you'll appreciate this. Like my wife and I will go either have a fight or go to an event, and something crazy happens. And in my mind, when those things are happening, I know I'm like very conscious, like this is going to be hilarious, like 2 weeks from now. And my problem as a kind of somebody who's comedically inclined is like, I just want to jump the gun and just go right into the humor immediately. But other people aren't ready for that usually, So like so much of humor is like about their timing. And so I have to kind of slow down on getting silly with it, because like not everybody's ready for that sort of thing.
But you know what though? Like what you just described is actually really healthy. Like that, like knowing that that when you're going through a difficult thing, whether it's an argument with somebody, stressful situation, knowing that like this is going to be funny one day actually can just, it's like self-regulate. Like, okay, you're just clocking it and kind of putting a pin in it. Like, I'm going to come back to this because there's definitely going to be humor in this. I kind of have a mantra that is, it's all material. Like everything in life is material. And so when I'm going through a hard time, kind of like what you're thinking is, man, this is going to be material for something someday, whether for me it's a stand-up bit or a talk I'm doing for an organization, or for other people maybe it's a presentation at work or just a story around friends, at a dinner table or whatever. But like in life, man, it's all material for something someday. But yeah, it's probably smart though to clock it, hang on to it, and not, as you and your wife are getting into it going, hey, I tell you what, that reminds me.
All right, quick pause. I want to mention something I am stoked about. Let's be honest. Most guys aren't going to therapy until things in their relationship are already going not so great. And if you've ever felt like you're doing the best you can in your relationship, but like something is just missing, trust me, you're not alone. And most of us, we don't get taught this stuff. We're just told like, you got to communicate better, but no one ever shows us or tells us exactly how to do that. And that's why I am loving Caveman to Casanova. It's not a bunch of lectures and it's not therapy. It's just simple, practical tools that help you show up as the best version of yourself. So whether it's like you want to learn how to handle conflict a little bit better, or say what you actually mean without somehow making things worse, which we've all been there, it helps you do those things. It just starts with a quick quiz, and then it tailors the program for you based on what you could do a little bit better and what you're already doing really well. So if you want to be more intentional in your relationship without having to make it like a whole thing, then check out Caveman to Casanova. Or if you want to give your man a little nudge, I've put a link in the show notes. Check it out.
Yeah, I do have this premise that like the same way that a baker uses, sugar and flour and, milk and all this to create like these beautiful, amazing desserts. Like the comedian, we use pain in a way to kind of really set up these great moments of release of humor. And so like so much of like, I think when you tap into the idea that like we can actually leverage pain for good, I feel like, man, there's so much power in that. And the more conscious I am of that, I'm like, okay, hit me with anything. Like, I feel like, we're eventually have the kind of that spirit where we can eventually laugh at it or some aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mean, I'm sorry to hear that you've got this old dog that is coming toward the end of their life. Cause that's honestly for me, that is one of the hardest things that I've dealt with. But as you chronicle going through that, yeah, you may be able to, a year later or whatever, be able to kind of tell the story of an aging dog or like having to go to the hospital and do that whole thing in a way that you're able to find some levity through that whole painful process of like, what an absurd thing that we have to do when we have to like take our dog knowing what we're about to do, that kind of stuff. I remember when my dog Bridger got sick and we were, my wife's a vet. And so we went to her hospital, laid him down, and a couple of our friends who work with her were there to help. And we put him down, and I was a wreck. He was like my first dog I ever got as a puppy. I was a wreck. But I don't like being super vulnerable and crying in front of people. I don't, that I'm not super comfortable. And so we've got two of like her nurses who are great and were being very helpful. And I had been for like a couple of months sleeping in our living room with my dog because he couldn't make it up the stairs to our bedroom anymore. As I was leaving, and the nurses, I could hardly breathe. I was crying, and the nurses said, "Well, we're going to take good care of him." And I said something like, "They said, I know this is hard." They said, "I know this is hard," and I said, "Yeah. Well, the worst part for Kelly is she's going to have to share a bed with me again." And they kind of laughed, and it wasn't that funny, but it was like enough levity, honestly. And I think that it was my reflex just to say that in the moment, but it was enough levity that honestly, it was just enough to like let me breathe to get out the hospital and in my car so I could freaking like ugly man cry. And it was just like, sometimes that's all it takes. So yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I want to hear more about so you're working with a comedian. Comedian says, "All right, I want your help. I feel like I've got great content, but I'm not really standing out." First of all, what is it like to work with comics when you're talking about like marketing and SEO, like search engine optimization and stuff like that? Comedians are weird people, so what is it like to work with them doing this?
Yeah, I think the ones who end up working with me are at a point where they recognize they need help, right? They I think so much about what's the comedic life is like, you do everything by yourself, right? You're writing your own jokes, you're standing alone on a stage, like so much about it is DIY. But then you hit a certain level where you're like, okay, I can either focus on doing all this marketing stuff, or I can focus on getting sharper as a performer and really trying to optimize what makes me really good. And so when I end up working with comedians, they're usually like really relieved to work with somebody who like can handle the stuff that they dread, that they don't really want to deal with. Like, I feel like a lot of them recognize like, yeah, I need to have a stronger online presence because, especially the seasoned ones, there's a lot of, I feel like there's a lot of resentment from like, especially like seasoned comedians for a lot of the newer comics who are, I would say, are not even necessarily comics. They're just good at having an online presence.
Yeah.
And they get on stage at an actual comedy club and they only have like 5 minutes worth of like really funny material. And so people actually go to the comedy clubs because they want to see like an influencer or a personality or a celebrity, and it's less about the pure comedy of it. So it is really interesting because I get to connect with comedians on that level about like, man, we love the true, kind of spirit of comedy. Why should, like it proves the point that if you are really good at promoting yourself, then there's more and more opportunity for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so there's a bit of relief that they feel. And I'm happy. I love just being able to kind of lean in on the things that I know are working and the things that I know are going to help them. And so there's just a lot of trust that I feel like is instantly made when they connect with somebody who understands their world and can really take on the strengths of the stuff that they're really weak at.
Yeah, it's a good point. A lot of people outside of the world of comedy don't really understand that there are people who have been working the craft of stand-up comedy and working clubs for years, and they've got hours worth of like decent to great material that they could go on stage and do at the drop of a hat. But then you've got people who, put together some funny sketches online, maybe a few funny bits, and then they started growing an audience, and now they've got like millions of followers, and then they go, maybe I'll try stand-up. They get a few good minutes of stand-up, and now they're getting headlined at this club, and now the seasoned comic is like, what the heck, man? And and like you said, they've only got like a few great minutes, and then they're kind of just scrounging for their lives there when I could entertain this crowd just as good, if not better, but they don't know me. So what you're doing is like helping bridge that gap. Like, well, we got to get you known online. You kind of missed that boat while you were, drinking beer and telling jokes in basements across the United States for a decade.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like, that's the big opportunity is figuring out like, okay, you kill on stage, you have a great command, you have a great product, essentially. You have a great product, so let's put it on the shelf so people can see it, right? Let's figure out how to advertise it. Because a comedian is like, they have kind of three roles, right? They're the product, they're the ones that tell the jokes. They're a business owner because they technically they have to run their business and they are the business, right?
Right.
And they have to really connect with their fans. And so like most comedians are really want to just do the one and not, and not really accept the responsibility of the three. So yeah, that's where I feel like I can help.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Jay-Z or somebody said, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. And that's kind of how I feel though too, is like what you said of like, you're the product and you're the entertainer. And it took me a long time to realize like I need help. And I'm such a control freak that I wanted to do everything myself. I'm like, it's my voice, it's my, whatever, that to like let someone else help in any way was like, oh my God. But, and I think whether you're a comedian or anyone else in the creative world, giving yourself more time to create and be creative and let the people who are good at like, the online, the design, that kind of stuff, that is so huge. That has freed me up so much to be able to like do the things that I'm actually really good at. So what's your model? Like, how do you, like when you take, you've got a comedian, you've got their stuff. I'm sure they already have some kind of a website. Is there a model that you say like, all right, here's what we're going to start. Here's what every comedian needs.
Yeah, I do have. I have what's called like the 5 foundations. I feel like every comedian needs this. I feel like the first foundation, and I like to call it somewhat of a pyramid scheme because it builds on top of each other into the tippy top. So I say the base foundation is like visual messaging. Like there's something unique about you that people register whether you realize it or not, right? Your hairstyle, like you wear glasses.
Wait, why'd you automatically go to hairstyle when you're talking to me? Hold on.
Well, you got to, you and I have different hairstyles, right?
Yeah.
You got glasses on your head.
I'd kill for that, man. I would kill for that.
The same way that, like when people see Gabriel Iglesias, they think of immediately a couple things, right? They think of the word fluffy, right? They think of like him wearing Hawaiian shirts and having a big head, like all of his artwork on his specials are him with a giant head. And so, there's somebody who's really tapped into this visual messaging of like, hey, here's what makes me unique, and I'm just gonna lean in on it. Carrot Top is another person. Like there's so many things built into that name. It describes his hair, it describes the color of his hair. It's just kind of wacky. So, I feel like when you have that base visual messaging, I feel like that's an easy way for people to clock you and recognize you.
Yeah.
Then I'd say the home base for that is the second level, which is your website. Like once you have a brand, where does it live? Like ideally it lives on your website so that when people are looking for you, they know exactly where to find you. And and everything lives on your website, right? Like your bio, your headshot, your tour dates, the links to your socials, like everything should basically be housed in your website. So I'd say that's the second foundation.
That's
The third
and that's one thing that like I didn't realize for a long time with my speaking and with everything that I do is like everything else you're doing online needs to funnel toward that website, because the website is where people are going to get the most information and actually want to book you. And that's something that like I was all over the freaking place.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, especially comedians, lean in on what I would say is the third foundation, which is social media, right? They think like the be all end all of my online presence has to be on social. So that's where they spend the majority of the time. And they're trying to figure out new ways to create content, or, I don't want to burn my material, or I don't, where do I point people to? And they make like a link tree with like 7,000 buttons that nobody clicks. So social media, I'd say, is the third foundation. Is like once you have your website, then you can stand out on social and have some place to point people to. Like, oh, you like this? You like my stuff? Find out more at my website. Yeah. So I'd say that's the third foundation. The fourth is an email list, right? Because like, let's say you grow a huge following on social media, you don't really own those fans. Like the platforms own those fans. So if you have a huge following on Instagram, they're not really yours. They're Mark Zuckerberg's, right? They only follow you from a distance. So,
and Mark Zuckerberg is not funny.
No,
so that's a guy who will not be selling out arenas to do stand up. Yeah.
No. So the big opportunity for comedians is to move people from the social platforms onto their own platform, which I would say is their email list, because you can monetize your fans, and you can stay connected to your fans on a much deeper level in the inbox than anywhere else. So that's kind of the fourth foundation. And then the final foundation is just having offers. Like, how do you monetize beyond the microphone? There's different ways you can get paid as a comedian, without having to be on stage, right? You can create a fan club that people pay on a monthly fee to be a part of. You can create, digital products. You can release specials on your own on YouTube and maybe charge early access to see it. You can sell merch online. So, once you have those foundations, it really gives you the opportunity to monetize on a much deeper level. And your fans are going to love you for it, right? They're going to be happy to pay you money because they love your comedy. They love what you're about. And so, you want to really prime your audience to become super fans. And when you have those 5 things working for you, that you're really poised to own your fan base and serve them well for a long time.
I like that. And again, like that's, I think, true for the world of comedy or really anyone that's trying to build a brand of like all of these things can point toward your website. But also just starting on like, what's your visual presence? Like, what do people know you for, and lean into that. And I've seen a lot of like industry speakers as well as comics who, and I've done this myself, like doing things backwards. Like, I got to have some merch. Like so I'm going to spend all this money and time on like cool merch. And it's like, dude, you have a crap website. Your social media is all over the place. You don't have a mailing list. Like, okay, so you sold like 9 stickers, like what is this doing? And so it's easy to get distracted by the tip of the pyramid, exactly. the sugar on top, when it's like, let's start the foundation here a little bit before we get too stoked about all the other stuff.
Yeah. So I'd say that's ultimately what I help my clients have, is to build that entire ecosystem. But I really start everything with a kind of deep dive assessment. So I'll do like a 2-hour deep dive call with a client first, just to really understand from their perspective, like, hey, what are the things that make you unique? What do people say about you? Like, who are the ones giving you high fives after you perform? Because every comedian is not ideal for every audience, right? You might have a natural leaning to attract a certain segment of comedy fans, right? Whether it's like on a political spectrum, you're more left leaning or right leaning, or you're clean or you're blue in terms of your material. You have you're a certain age group of life that people naturally, like fathers, really like your stuff, as opposed to teenagers, right? So we really try to pinpoint like who are the people that, if all you did is attract this group of people, this subset of people, you would be absolutely rich, because like they're the ones who are going to be buying your merch. They're the ones who are going to be going to your shows and buying tickets. They're the ones who are going to be happy to pay for VIP experiences and join the fan club. Like if all we do is position you to win these type of people over and over and over and perform at these types of venues, then you're set, right? So that's the goal, is to really get clarity before we start, getting creative.
Oh, I love that. And what's funny too about that is like, as a performer, that's just not the way we think. But as a marketer, you have to think like, no, who's your target demographic in terms of growing your business and growing your presence online? Because as a comic, you're like, well, I can make anybody laugh. Like, I don't care who's in the audience, like you put college students or put like college professors. I don't care, and that's a great mindset to have as an entertainer and as a performer. But you're right. There's going to be a certain type of person who is following you and signing up for your email list and is like ride or die fan. Matt Rife has different fans than Jim Gaffigan does, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so that's part of when we start getting creative then. I'm like, okay, then we know who you're trying to attract. We know the people who pay money to see you the most. We know the ones who are happy to book you into their venues. So this is the strategy we're going to build it off of. So that's how we build everything based off of that. So we start with that, that clarity and that strategy, and we build everything to support that.
And so do you have any clients that you're like particularly proud of? Like, man, that started here and now we've seen like a huge increase or...
Yeah, I would say I have two in particular that I'm really proud of. And they're both similar in different ways, right? So one, his name's Bob Smiley. He's been performing for like 27, 28 years now. And his primary audience is churches. So, kind of goes back to my original story. But he has a full career just performing for faith-based organizations and churches and crowds. So, he's a clean comedian. He has a lot of laughs per minute, a lot of punchlines. He has kind of a manic, fun, kind of fast energy. And so when I first met him, he had a really kind of cool looking website, but it was not very functional. Like the navigation was in the middle of the page. It was like designed cool, but if you tried to pull it up on your phone, you wouldn't get anywhere. So
yeah,
he was a great kind of case study to really redo his entire, visual and brand presence. And that extends like everywhere now. Another one, his name is Azar Usman. He's a very well-known Muslim comedian. And so he, toured a decade with Dave Chappelle and opened for him. And one of his quotes is a positive quote from Dave Chappelle. Like, Azar is like the untouchable comedian. He's like the comedian from the future. And he has a great quote from CNN that calls him America's funniest Muslim. So I'm like, man, when you have quotes like that from like the authority figures, then you are poised to really stand out. So again, we lean on that. Both of them are getting gigs in those types of scenarios, right? Azar is getting a lot of kind of Muslim-oriented organizations who are activating him for, either fundraisers or private organizations or universities. And Bob continues to get the types of gigs that he's trying to get.
Oh, that's great, man. That's really cool. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's like, man, you've got these like great testimonials. Let's leverage those, dude. You got Dave Chappelle out here being like, I'm telling you, man, this guy's a truth. And then you're like, you gotta go with it. You gotta go with that, man. I just wanted to try my Dave Chappelle. I had a bit about Dave Chappelle or like a bunch of comedians who were trying to tell why'd the chicken cross the road joke, like if that was the only joke left, So I had this whole bit of like Dave Chappelle being like, I'm telling you, man, his chicken's changed. This whole anyway. All these stupid anyway. But man, it sounds like you are really changing the lives for the better of some of these comics, like getting comics who have all the goods, they've got the skills, but just getting their brand out there more so they can just book more stuff and make more people laugh.
Yeah, and make a good financial living in the process, right? So they're not beholden just to getting paid when they get on stage. Like, I feel like that's the big opportunity, is to what I call monetize beyond the microphone.
I love it, man. Well, where can people find you if they're interested in what you do and finding out more? What's the best place to go?
Yeah, they can find me at comedybranding.com, and on Instagram I'm Comedy Branding. So very clear about what I do and what I'm about. So I try to kind of, eat my own dog food, so to speak, is, show people that if you really hone in on what's unique about you, then you're going to attract the right people. So yeah, find me at comedybranding.com.
Yeah, it'd be weird if like you were a branding specialist and it was like, I can't figure out where to find this guy online, or like your website is some super vague thing. Like, well, I'm not sure. So yeah, comedybranding.com. And, from eating your own dog food to soon drinking your own champagne, man. I really appreciate being able to talk with you, man. This was cool.
Thanks, Paul. I had a blast. Appreciate it.
All right. And as always, wherever you're listening, subscribe, follow the podcast. It helps us a lot. And also follow us on YouTube. Until next time.
You've been listening to Laugh or Death with Paul Osincup. If you're planning a conference or event and want something smart, meaningful, and actually funny, book Paul to speak. To learn more or to get a copy of his book, The Humor Habit, visit laughordeath.com.